Dr. Shell, I believe he's in his element back here at the podium. I know that we all have some things we'd like to talk with Dr. Shell about, and he should be at the reception. We should have time there. And Dr. Shell, I'm glad that Barry saved you some of his time, so I didn't have to wrestle you off the stage. That was very interesting. I appreciate it. Now, Dr. Schmittou is going to come talk with us about some of the things with the state that were involved in the early years when they got started in fisheries management and aquatic resources development, and I appreciate him coming. Come on, Dr. Schmittou. Let's see if we can get this.
See if I can get up on the stage.
Clipped on you there.
Which way moves it forward? This one? I'm looking at my watch. I received an email on Friday from Ken Weathers that said I would get up and get down within 20 minutes. And I just told Joe a few minutes ago that I intended to cheat a little bit. He said, "You better not." He's got two hooks. One, it looks like a walking stick, the old walking stick with a crook in it. And the other one looks like, he said, "You know, at Christmas time they have these pliers that crack nuts. Same thing except longer," he said. I'm going to essentially pick up with the fisheries section where Dr. Shell left off, maybe a little bit before where he left off. I'm going to pick up going back. I'll get to 51 or thereabout, but I'm going to go back much further. And the theme of my talk will be fishing, the fish, and the environment. As you know, the fisheries section doesn't have responsibility for the water itself. That came under an organization called the Alabama Water Improvement Commission back when I worked for the state for a couple of years. There were only two agencies in all of this state that the fisheries section just didn't like to work with, did not like to work with. That was AWIC, the Alabama Water Improvement Commission, and Auburn University Extension, and I'll get to both of them later on and give you whys on it. The Alabama Fisheries section in the Alabama Game and Fish Division was responsible for the fishing and the fish populations, and responsible for the environment or the organisms in all aquatic systems or public waters in the state. That was the fish populations and all the other aquatic organisms as well. Now, this story that Dr. Shell started is probably the greatest story that will never be told adequately. I think he has done a great job in telling the story of Dr. Swingle and the program that went on at Auburn in different things that's been done over the past several years. He's done that. But the real story, as far as the fisheries section is concerned, probably will not ever be told adequately. It is a remarkable story, and I'm glad that I was a part of it for some 18 months or so, maybe a little longer, 20 months. But what was accomplished by that organization, and still being accomplished, but I'm only going to cover that first 20 years, is a rather remarkable thing. I'm going to talk about Alabama's fish and water resources I'm going to refer to those as the needs or constraints, and we could say opportunities. I'll talk about the agencies that are involved, and there are many, many of them. Some of them only mention them. That's the means of getting accomplishments, and the people, those were the solutions. Those are the ones that made it happen. They had to have of course, the resources, and they had to have the agencies, institutions cooperating with them. But the people are the ones that made this happen. And there's some really interesting stories with these people. But Alabama is certainly blessed, as I think Barry mentioned, and with its water resources. Probably no state has as much water per unit of land as our fresh water as Alabama, and that would include the subterranean water. But if you look at from the north, and I think everybody knows this, and I'll not dwell on it, but you have the Tennessee Valley, the Tennessee River system, and then on the eastern side, the Chattahoochee, and then in the middle, the Coosa, Tallapoosa, Alabama systems with the Sipsies and all of those up north, either coming into those systems or into the Tombigbee, and then the Tombigbee joining or Black Warrior, and the Black Warrior joining the Tombigbee coming in from Mississippi. And then all of it going down into the southern part. There's a lot of water, tremendous amount of water. And as everyone knows, water is the most limiting substance on Earth for human habitat and human use, although close to 75 to 78% of the world's surface is water. Also, they point out that water takes on the characteristics of its environment itself, whatever's around it. Mostly the soils, and so we have the soils of the Tennessee Valley clays and rather relatively rich soils, and then we come on further south into the Piedmont, which we have a portion of here, and then just a little bit south of where I stand at the moment is the upper coastal plains, and then the lower coastal plains, and then the red hills, and not very, very productive soil for agriculture or for fish either. And the black belt that runs across there is it's almost unusable, but I guess it's more fertile than other parts. But these waters have great diversity of animal life, fish species, both I'd say in quality, if not quantity of fish weight, but certainly of fish species. There's a diverse quantity of them. And then there's a lot of other organisms, aquatic organisms. When I worked with a fisheries section, we didn't pay a lot of attention to the snails and the mollusk and the other organisms, whether it's food supply or that sort of thing. But now I think the section is paying a lot more attention to that. Now, before 1950, I think everybody knows the socioeconomics of the state. Mostly poor. Our state was poor. We didn't have very good electrical services. I don't think I was just a little bit above the Alabama line in Tennessee, and we didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity until I guess I was about the 4th or 5th grade. I hadn't even seen electricity or electric light bulb. Much of Alabama was that way, although Alabama had far more electricity produced by hydroelectric power than probably anybody. Alabama Power Company was one of the first in the country to be producing power, and it went back into all around 1912 or so. The water resources were contaminated with about everything back in before 50, particularly erosion, poor management, land management practices. Agriculture, particularly with the cotton, created a tremendous amount of erosion in the country for over 100 years, 150 years, washing away the topsoils. This would affect fish populations in various ways. Fishing and recreation were good and not so good. Recreation was not all that good because we had a lot of reservoirs and a lot of places to get into the water, but it was only in localized areas, and then access was not as good as it could have been. Believe it or not, conservation and development of aquatic resources wasn't all that good, although I think the first Alabama became a state in 18 and 19, and 18 and 20 they had their first Water Conservation Act. But I don't know what that act consisted of, but I was surprised to learn that. And then the big thing, though, was Homer Swingle and the Alabama Polytechnic Institute. And it was not just Homer Swingle, there were others, but I'll mention a few of them. But remember, he had other people working with him, particularly Smith and Swingle and Swingle and Smith. Dr. Shell showed you these, and I think if you'll look closely, you'll find Dr. Swingle out there. This is the way they started, and if you'll look close here, you can see Dr. Swingle. Here he is out in the ponds. I show those to show Dr. Shell mentioned that was going on, and Dr. Swingle was out in the ponds measuring and collecting fish and wading up into the mud along with the laborers. He was labor himself, and he did this consistently. It wasn't just a photo opportunity, and that is going to be important as we move along with the story. Dr. Shell showed this one or the other one. I think they might have been two buildings before they got to the old Bibb Graves, but this is where Fisheries. This was the FAA building of the day, and they started in these rather rustic conditions. Although I think Bibb Graves it was bigger, but it must have been worse. You couldn't even lock the building. And that became a problem at times, people coming in. You couldn't lock the offices either. It was easy to just climb the wall if you wanted to and get over into anybody's office, Dr. Shell or Dr. Swingle or Dr. Lawrence. This is important too. It wasn't elaborate. And inside there were no tools, there were no computers. The old calculators were those that bigger than typewriters, which they were a lot of typewriters, and many of them were still, back in those days, were manual, this and then slide them, or maybe this way. I never did learn to type, so I don't know which way they slid. I had more hand than fingers. The meters back in those days, the DO meters, consisted of collecting with a bottle train water that would pass from one point to another, and then they had winklers made up from reagents on the shelf that you would mix up to get the right combinations, and then you would drop them into the water, and then put a little starch in there, and then you could see what you can measure and that would get your oxygen levels, and it took several minutes to do it. We used to make those up in class, and then I watched one day, I'd taken Dr. Swingle's class, and I watched a guy come in he had parked his green station wagon outside. That was a trademark of the station wagons back then of the fisheries section personnel. And he comes in and he gets up. We'd put these bottle trains up on the shelves in front of us, and then we had the reagents made and put in individual boxes. You could get a combination and go out and check your ponds. And he just went in there and picked up all of these and was poking them in a bag, and out the door he went. What in the world was all that? So I started asking questions, and I said, well, that was Merrill Nail. He was just collecting them for the fisheries section biologist. Up here, we made those up. Yeah, but Dr. Swingle, he knows it. He makes them up for them. It's like, you know, when you're a kid and you go off to college and you come home, and the first thing you do is get in the house, you open the refrigerator and start getting out food, or see what Mama's got fixed up. Well, that's the same way they came home, because they thought that was home. They just came home and anything that was there, you know, they were welcome to it. And indeed they were. I thought that was also an interesting thing of this association of the fisheries section and with the department. All right, in 1950, this is before there was a fisheries section, about 10,000 farm fish ponds that had been stocked using state hatcheries. There were 3 public fishing lakes, Crenshaw being the first one, that are already in open, and 8 of them were under construction. There were 25 or more, I couldn't count all of them, major river reservoirs of TVA and Alabama Power primarily. And then the 2 public fish hatcheries. Actually, there was another one being used too. There was an act by the state legislature about 18 and 20, no, it was later, about 18 and maybe, it was back up in about 1880, but a long time before they built these first 2. But the first 2 fish hatcheries, one at East of Bogan and at Spring Hill, were built in 1924 and 25 respectively. And then this number 5 here is API pond technology was fully developed. This is in 1950. Swingle was always already looking for other horizons. But the API, or the Alabama Polytechnic, or let's say Fisheries at Auburn and the Game and Fish Division pond and river reservoir investigations were well underway. They'd been underway. Now these investigations they wanted to examine the causes of fish kills all over wherever they occurred, and so they were doing it. And conservation officers were reporting them. Soil conservation people were reporting them. All people from all over the state. They saw a fish kill in a river or in a stream, they were reporting it. Plus, they were investigating fish kills in ponds to see what was causing those. The first Alabama Department of Conservation fish biologist ever employed by the state was John Hester. He was a recent master's graduate of Auburn. He worked in parks. There wasn't a fisheries section, of course, at that time. Uh-oh. Don't know how to get out of that. Hit it. I hit the wrong button there. Okay, thank you. All right, let's take an activity here. I'll talk about the activities in the morning that were important to the state, the programs that they had. But this was a major thing. You couldn't do this now. It's impossible to do this now. But I think these are block-off nets that will be in rivers or reservoirs in the state. And the block-off nets were run from top to bottom, top of the water to the bottom, and would completely close in whatever fish were in there. And then they would come in following that with, I think this is a rotenone. I'm not sure what they're doing, but the way they would put a tub with rotenone in liquid form, get it into a liquid form, and then they would use a Venturi system and pump it down all the way down to the bottom, and they'd get it into the get it as well distributed inside that wall as possible, those nets. And then they would go out and on that first day start picking up all the fish that they got. And then they would, there's some great stories. Don Moss and Buck Bird, there's all kinds of stories of those two guys, the things that they would do. But here, all of those fish that they picked up that first day, and then the second day, and sometimes the third day, and if you were in threadfin shad territory that third day, even the second day. And I was glad when they discontinued rotenone sampling, because I was the one, or one of the ones, that got that second and third day pickup. And it was mostly just liquid, and it smelled awful. But if you had it, you'd get scrapes and cuts on you the first day, but then the second day and the third day you'd get all that juice in those cuts and get infected. No, it was the opposite. You rub that stuff on you so it would clear up, because that has some kind of antibiotic or a cure-all in it. But I want you to notice that here they weighed every fish, and they measured every fish. They'd sort them to groups, try to get size groups, species groups, and all this with them. And Dr. Swingle would be right in the middle of it. Now here are the two first biologists that were in the fisheries section. They created the fisheries section. Buck Bird here on the left with the hat. Buck was hired as chief in January the 5th, 1951. And the big bear here is in the middle is Don Moss. And then there's Dr. Swingle sitting on his rear end down here keeping the records. And they were doing the weighing and the sorting on the boards. That's typical. Now, the fisheries section and Game and Fish Division was initiated in January of 1951. The first fisheries biologist, I.B. Bird. Second fisheries biologist, Don Moss. And then they went over and borrowed okay. Now they set out immediately, the two of them, and they went to every county in the state. Every county. They went to every reservoir, every river, every major stream, all at different places, or in every county along those places. They did this for almost a year. And they constantly traveling, and they were sampling, getting samples of fish populations with seines. They were looking at talking to people about the fishery, but they got to know the state extremely well. I think I have a something here. Okay. I'll get to that in a moment. The Dingell-Johnson Act came in, and this is important. They call it the DJ Fund. That was for fish restoration in the states, all states in the United States. And the first funding of the DJ Fund, this was passed, I think, in early 1951, and in July, the first check written from the DJ funds, being administered by the Fish and Wildlife Service, was to Alabama to pay for that survey. Now, I think that's the only time that they used DJ money for survey. I think from then on it was used for probably public lakes, I believe. But the joint fishery section and Alabama Part and Auburn FAA or Auburn Fisheries, they started cooperating then. I don't think that Alabama did anything, the fisheries section did anything without the blessing of Dr. Swingle. I think they discussed it, and they that was, and then they sort of agreed on it, and it was just understood that that was the way it was going to be. And this is probably as good a place as any to say that fisheries section was essentially the extension of Auburn University. Auburn University is a land-grant university. It was it came on early on as a land-grant university, and they put in education in the early years, and then later on, several years later, they got in research, and it was then 1914 before they got in the extension part. And it was many years before the extension really had well-trained people that could go out and work with farmers. Well, consequently, they didn't get trained very well. So most of the and we didn't have anyone trained working in extension. They had an extension person who worked with fish and wildlife, but he was extending information coming out of southern Illinois, as Dr. Shell said, was an entirely different language than what they spoke down here. And what he was advocating in extending was almost 180 degrees from what the fisheries section would extend. But that cooperation was as close as you could possibly get. And all of the people who worked in the fisheries section came from Auburn. All had master's degrees, or almost all of them had master's degrees under Swingle and the staff at Auburn. They were being taught theory and principles as well as practices, and working in the ponds under Swingle and the staff. And so they were educated by Auburn. They got their theory and understanding from Auburn. They were taking Auburn technology that had been developed, that was shown here a while ago within the deep ponds and so forth, and that's what they were extending. And it was ready-made for them. It was a perfect opportunity. All they had to do is take that technology and start administering it, and they did a great job of it. Now they moved from the public fishing lakes had been under the Parks Division, and they were transferred from the Parks Division to the Fisheries section, and then John Hester came over with them. And then Hooper was the fourth biologist hired. Now, I'll move very quickly here. Fish and water, the needs and constraints. That was the wild fish population had needs. They were under a lot of pressure from environmental, maybe overfishing in some places, but pretty much the pollution and the man's use of the water, and that had been going on since the humans, or at least the settlers, white settlers, came into the country in the early 1800s. But there'd been no fisheries section up until 1951. Now, fishing access and opportunities were limited, although they could have been greater, but access was poor. And so fishing quality was not all that good at the time. This is in 1951 when they started. Now, the agencies that were involved were the Auburn, we've mentioned, and then the other agencies within the Department of Conservation, Parks Division, conservation officers, game wardens, wildlife people, the engineering section, then the Soil Conservation Service, everybody, even the health department. Everyone wanted to help the fisheries section get started and build ponds and help develop the fisheries sections program. And then if you look at the people, then we've already mentioned Swingle, and then the Alabama Department of Conservation was Earl McGowan at the time, and of course Bird and Moss and Hester, and then Archie Hooper, and then Clarence White was the next one, Kelly, and then Johnny Krantz. I put Sam Spencer and others here because there were others in that pioneering group, but I think Joe Addison will cover Sam Spencer as being in another era, although he was a pioneer, and he made several contributions that I think I'll mention one of them here in a moment, but I'll not list him as a pioneer, although he was. Charles Kelly and Ralph Allen. Charles Kelly was Game and Fish Division director for chief of the Game and Fish Division for a long time. I don't know, 40 years or something. He really had a tremendous impact on pollution and the environmental factors. But Ralph Allen also was very much interested in the pollution, particularly the pesticide use, chemicals and things, and the two of them really tremendously helped fisheries, or fisheries helped them in getting a lot of laws, not only for water but for land use as well. And then there were others like Jack Snow and Russ Fielding. And when I worked in I had 8 counties in my district, and I worked with the Soil Conservation Service in all of those counties. I wouldn't even go into the field without the Soil Conservation Service working with me. We helped them and they helped us tremendously. The program and projects and activities, it was a tremendously diverse program that the fisheries section had. Barry was talking about how they didn't even know what one part of the county or one county or group or one place was doing, one part of the state, and be working on one activities, and some will be on the other. And maybe you're working out of the same office and you're working on different projects. And even when I'd go to the field, I might work on 2 or 3 different projects in the same day. I might be working with the Soil Conservation Service and checking ponds, but I'd also ask about where polluting places were in the county, because these soil conservation people knew those areas very well. Point source pollution, we were monitoring all of those. We were getting and identifying them and locating them, and we were checking oxygen and looking for chemical spills and that kind of thing, and all of them. I spent probably 60 to 65% of my time working with pond research and management. Stream reservoir investigations or surveys, I did much less. I think Johnny Krantz before me did probably close to 15%. Fish public, state public fish lake work on those, I would say under 10% for me. But public response and coordination and cooperation and teaching and promoting and so forth was another major thing that I did in particular. Now I'm going to quickly get off this because this is This is the research station that had been developed that he mentioned a while ago, the E ponds. These are E and F ponds, but they're turned upside down and backwards. I don't know who did that. And then just to mention fertilization, 882. That was the standard, 882. It was not long before I joined the state in '64 that they quit using this method here to fertilize. Then they started putting it on platforms that worked just as well. Weed control was a major problem in farm management. We had a Ray Allison at Auburn, and one of our state biologists, Dave Kelly, worked on diseases. This is a fish kill caused by peppermills right here in Salkehatchie Creek. This is a pesticide drum. You'd find them everywhere because they were using DDT, aldrin, dieldrin, toxaphene. They were trying to eradicate the fire ant about this time, and they were using heptachlor. Charles Kelly and some of the Auburn and Archie Hooper went to a meeting, as a hearing, and the agriculture commissioner for the state of Alabama was saying how they were going to eradicate the fire ant. And so he finished and sat down, and Charles Kelly got up and says, "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. You cannot. There's no possible way that you can eradicate the fire ant. We're going to have to learn to live with them and take that approach rather than trying to eradicate them with more and more and more chemicals." And the commissioner jumped up and says, "That's just a lie. That's just a lie. We've already eradicated them twice." Geigy Chemical Company was a big source of fish kills down in the tidal, and boy, when they had a fish kill, it would be tons and tons of them. We had all of them. This is oil spills, and there's oil. You see them everywhere. Peppermills here in Opelika. Up in the north, like now, they've got the muds up there from a coal dust. That's a serious problem. They don't know how they're going to control it. It's gotten loose up there. This is a strip mine here. I'll leave that one. This photo here is a typical state lake, public fishing lake opening. And you'd usually see people of all races, all ages, gender, state of health. Some of them would be they'd roll them up to the side and put little scotches underneath their wheels of their wheelchair, and they'd be there fishing. This was a huge thing. These state lakes, public fishing lakes, were tremendously popular back in the 60s and 70s. And I'll say one thing about those two. They're going to be popular again in the next couple of 3 or 4 or 5 years when people start fishing for food. This is Dr. Swingle. Dr. Swingle is people make the difference in this thing. And Swingle Dr. Shell mentioned that he would go up with these on paper or blackboards, whiteboards, whatever, and just write. And he was tremendously effective. And I put this slide in here to say you don't have to have PowerPoints that old guys like us can't use anyway. It's a lot easier, and you get a lot more emotion out of people when they're writing it up there and they're showing it, and then they get to scratching this out and putting it over. I think there's a different teaching, learning relationship there that might even be better than having PowerPoints. I still use those when I go overseas. I make a point to use these things, even though I can, use a PowerPoint once somebody's helped me with it. the state used always followed on principles. And if they had somebody hypothesis, they'd go out and test the hypothesis. This hypothesis was, then the big argument, and Buck Bird lost this one. He was usually on the front end of the things. He didn't make many mistakes, and I think Charles may have been on this one too, wrong on this one. But the telephone magnetos, the old telephone, you cranked them, and that magneto in there, you could crank that thing and put your wires in the water, and you could roll over fish. I mean, it would. And they said, you can't do damage to the fish population. Well, these fish were rolled over, and they ranged in 65 to 85 pounds, the bigger ones, and they were all sizes of them. All right, I think the one point. This is the last one you're ever going to get, and if I see you getting that equipment, I'm going to get it. The quality of the fish biologist has always been one of the things that Sam Spencer did, and it was instituted during this period, was to get all biologists certified with fisheries scientists. That is tremendously important. And the fisheries section support system, they cultured this tremendous support system, and Barry's talked about that a little bit, but Auburn and all the different agencies, with one or two exceptions, were supportive of that. And then the diversity and quality of the fisheries program. And I think the understanding of the fish populations that more than justified the use, I couldn't turn it off, more than justified the use of the rotenone. I don't think the rotenone samples, with maybe one or two exceptions, did that much damage to anything other than just the image. It just doesn't look good when you're out with doing rotenone fish populations that you're supposed to be protecting. But I think the knowledge gained from those were worth it.
Joe Adams is coming. He's
Yeah.
going to be real quick, but he's going to kind of pick up with the last 40 years and how the state's done with fisheries.
Yeah, this area right here, right? This area. Get it started. Okay. Boy, Ken, you gave me a hard act to follow. If Buck and Archie and Clarence were here, every boss I ever had since 1962 would be in the room. That's hard to believe. And I've got some slides to show that Barry didn't always dress that way. Anyway, what I want to show you right here, this is the Fisheries section 1967. And this is significant from the standpoint that the Fisheries section led the fight in establishing minimum water quality standards in this state. Originally, the AWIC had requested a minimum of 4 parts per million DO. As it turned out, testimony from the Fisheries section, from Auburn University, and from a lot of other people, technical people around our state, was successful in getting the feds for establishing a minimum water quality standard of 5 parts per million on DO in game and fish waters. And you can pretty well tell how clean cut we were in the 60s. Oh, I thought this worked. This, can you hear me now? Okay. What's this thing for then? All right. Well, you can see what a clean cut organization we were in 1967. Everybody pretty well dressed, pretty clean and neat. I think I got some pictures coming that's going to show a little change. Oh, wait a minute. Now, there's one thing for sure, that there might be a guy there on the right that instituted you had to wear a shirt anytime you went in the restaurant. I think he and the fellow on the left caught this fellow on the right without a shirt on one day. But anyway, for the last 40 years, I'm pretty familiar with what went on because I've been working for the last 42 years. And what did the fisheries section look like? In 1971, when Sam Spencer became chief, there were 6 districts. There was a total of 12 biologists, field biologists. There were no actually any biologists except assigned to districts at that time. These are the 6 districts. We had actually expanded to 7 districts, and Sam got an idea that he wanted a fish hatchery, and we certainly needed it. Because I don't know if you know it or not, those are walleye if you can't tell what they are, and that's probably more walleye on that one stringer than our guys have caught in about 3 years. The honey hole, I think, has been silted in, Sam. But anyway, Sam Spencer, when he became chief in 1971, following Archie Hooper, decided that he wanted to expand what we were doing as our mission. And the purpose of expansion, I think, was twofold. He wanted striped bass and he wanted Florida bass. And to that extent, he picked this fellow by the name of James Cook to go down to the first fish hatchery since 1926 that had been operated by an actual fishery biologist. So James got his assignment at Spring Hill. It was a giant hatchery of 4 acres, 6 ponds, surrounded by azaleas. Got its water supply from the city of Mobile. I forgot the name of the lake right now. But it was gravity flow under the road, and you just can't even imagine how crude operating conditions that was. That lasted for about a year, and then Sam came up with the idea that, we're about 6 months, and then lo and behold, he said, hey, we can put a biologist in charge of a hatchery. Why don't we just hire a guy to be in charge of our state lakes program? And so Doug Powell came on. Doug was a rowdy-looking guy, but he looked a lot better when we first hired him. I don't know if you know these 2 guys, but one of them had hair then. That's Barry Smith on the right, if you don't know it. It would be your right, wouldn't it? And of course, that's Doug Powell on the left. I can't tell you what his nickname was. 1974, the fisheries section met at the Cheat House State Park. And man, that looks like the cast from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. But we were, I don't know if you realize it or not, at that point in time, there were no aids in districts. There was not even a 40-hour work week. It was 24/7, folks. We worked together, we played together, we fished, we hunted, and Sam was pretty smart, and Barry and the rest of the guys that followed. He knew that if we were going to go play together, what would we be talking? Fish. That's what we thought, that's what we did, and that's what we did the whole time that we were all together. And I guarantee you, once Sam got his idea about the Spring Hill hatchery, he said, hey, let's just build us a hatchery. So he decided that what he'd do, I think Barry was right in there with him, we're going to buy some property and build us not only a striped bass cultural center over in Otagoville, but we're going to raise Florida bass and we're going to do some research work. Well, they submitted the plan to buy the Otagoville station and build a hatchery. And lo and behold, the Fish and Wildlife Service said, why are you building a hatchery? We got one we'll give you. Of course, Sam was pretty smart. He went up and took a look at Carbon Hill and decided, we don't want that thing. The water quality's pretty bad. We'll take Marion if you're going to give away one. And no one even realized that they would actually fall for that line. But they did. They gave us the Marion Fish Hatchery when we took it over in 1970. Oh, my goodness. This is the guy that was in charge of our safety committee for shocking. That's Bill Park in the front and Jerry Denton. Sam, I think that's you, but I can't really tell. The back of your head there, I didn't realize that, but you can tell that some of our boats were pretty crude. But right away, right after we got the Marion Fish Hatchery, the order of the business was let's get self-sufficient in raising striped bass. And that's where we dispatched our people out to find striped bass. First, we had to build a hatchery and a lab. And for about $16,000, Sam said, if you can build it for under $16,000, you can have a stripe lab. So we built the hull of it. We bid that out, and we finished it ourselves. And we ended up being able, within less than 5 years, to be self-sufficient for culture of striped bass for the whole Southeast. And that's what it looks like on the inside. If you never assembled a lab like this, you need to go to Marion and take a look at it. It's been operational now for, hey, almost 30 years. So it's served its purpose. And lo and behold, raising striped bass, once you learn how to keep them alive after the first year and not kill all the eggs, was pretty easy. And another thing that Sam wanted, and everybody wanted at State Lakes, were catfish. We never did get quite enough catfish, and Auburn would give us a few every now and then that we could stock into some of our state lakes. So we got into culturing our own catfish, and we tried to turn out, I think, eventually ended up turning out about 150,000 advanced channel catfish per day. So all of this is growing from the Marion Fish Hatchery, taking that facility over in 1974. You're looking at people that were not raised in fish hatchery. The only course I ever had was a 5-hour course under Prather. It was a school of hard knocks, folks. If you don't think it wasn't, trust me, this fellow over here learned a lot quicker than I did that runs the American sport fish. My goodness, Sam, I need to tell you, I meant to say a while ago, not only we got a recovery program now for walleye, we got one for alligator gar. No, this was what the crew looked like about the mid-'70s. It was a good 10 years. And I'll tell you what, even some of these other guys within districts, they like to get out and fish. Now, fisheries in the 70s, like I told you, we hunted and we fished and we participated in everything outdoors that you could do. I don't think we had anybody on staff that didn't enjoy fishing that I can remember. Can y'all? Okay. These guys here, Barry may recognize that guy on the left and the fellow on the right. I understand they personally fished Little River out in that one day. And here's a guy with long hair. I think he was doing some electro fishing for red-eye bass. Is that what that was? Some stream sampling. Well, Sam had already hired, let's see, we had our first fishery biologist in charge of the hatcheries, had the first fishery biologist in charge of the State Lakes program. Well, obviously we got a weed problem now. And some little money came through, and before the end of Sam's tenure, he had hired an aquatic plant supervisor. And that was Joe Z, and he went to Mobile in D5. Let me make sure I didn't forget anything. You know you need notes at my age too, don't you? And I'm not used to this, but I have found this there. All right, Mr. Barry Smith. Mr. Barry Smith became the chief of fisheries in 1982. Let me back that up. Yeah, 1982, I remember that. And Barry, he liked to fish too. In fact, he liked stocking fish. And in 1982, basically the fisheries section had grown quite a bit. We had people at the hatcheries. We started out with just a few biologists, 12 biologists, 15 by the time Stan Cook was hired to run the East Boga hatchery. And this was a staff meeting that we had down on the causeway around 1983, if I remember correctly. Barry was significant. The AFA actually was started during Barry's tenure as chief of fisheries. He also, and I forgot one thing. Bibb County Lake was built during Sam's tenure, and this is the last public fishing lake that was built to this day. It's Escambia County Public Fishing Lake that was built during Barry's tenure as chief of fisheries. Also, we began to expand, and during this period of time, the District 5 office was built on the causeway. It was built with some fish kill money, so having fish kills can reward you a little bit if you can collect the money for it, and we got a little law that says the money comes to us, so we got to use it for something good, if I remember correctly. And also, about this time, Barry had the wonderful charge of trying to reopen the license for the Jordan Dam tail race, try to get us continuous minimal flows. In fact, that fight went on for about 8 years, if I remember correctly. And finally, thank goodness for the Tulatoma. Barry had an opportunity to expand the East Boga Fish Hatchery. And does that mean I'm out of time already? No. And so the East Boga Fish Hatchery, if you look in your bottom right, those are the original ponds, yes, in the Holden House. And all of these small ponds to your left were 2 large ponds. And essentially that had been like that since 1926. There's some other additional ponds that were expanded up back in the 60s, early 60s, but this is the first time that the East Boga Hatchery had been completely renovated since 1926 and put in operation. That was done in Barry's era. And about the time Barry gets ready to leave, lo and behold, Christmas arrives and the Volop Row funds come in. And now then, we got a bunch of money. But some of it's earmarked. Originally it's 10%, it went to 12.5%, and now it's 15% of all the Wallop Row funds that come in, which is collectively known, that's the DGA Wallop Row funds, as the sport fish funds. And 15% of that now is earmarked just for building boat ramps. That program that started back down to Buck Bird, when we didn't use any of our DJ funds for anything except capital development. Now then, it has come back, and 15% of it, right now about $600,000 to $700,000 a year, are earmarked just for working and building and repairing public boat and access areas around the state. C. White. Let me make sure I didn't forget something on Barry. Oh, I forgot. He created a new position in Montgomery called the Capital Development Coordinator position, just to handle all this new money and handle a lot of the capital development projects that took place in the 80s and 90s. Clarence White, who was originally, dates back to around 53 that he came on staff and had been in Montgomery for a long time, became chief in 1986. Just about the time the money arrived, Barry decided he was going to go in business for himself and make a lot more money. So, y'all may remember Clarence White. I'm afraid he could not be with us today. In fact, he's in a nursing home right now in Alex City, and I sure hope he's doing fine. But he's had a tough go of it. But Clarence White, dedicated fishery biologist, and he decided the first thing that what we're going to do, along with the guidance of Bill Reeves, we're going to do a reservoir management plan. We're going to start sampling reservoirs around this state. We're going to do it on a consistent basis, all 6 districts. And for the last 23 years, this reservoir management plan has produced over 300 years, sampling years, worth of data. We know more about bass and brim and crappie in this state than we ever knew before. And also for the last 21 years, we've been doing mini creels. We got over 100 mini creels on all of our reservoirs and public waters from around the state in the last 21 years. Y'all may recognize this fellow, he's still with us. But each bass that's collected is weighed, odorless pulled. They're sent, well, they used to be sent to the Marion lab over at Marion to be aged. Now these guys, a lot of them are actually doing it for themselves right in their office, so they're able to even age their own bass. Doing your mini creels, all this took place. Where'd Ken go? Is he standing? All right. Another thing that got started under C. White was the crappie trap netting annual sample that was usually done in the fall of the year. Also, the Bass Anglers Information Team, or the bait program, got started. And I've got a little data on that, if you haven't read that off of the line. Bait has produced, if I remember correctly, about 400 and some odd thousand tournaments, and about 1 million bass have been caught in the last 20 or so years. So that's a lot of data that's come in on the bait program. And the boat and access program, of course, has continued and gotten even larger since the Wallop Row funds and sport fish funds came into existence. During Clarence's era, we built 2 new offices, District 3 office and the District 6 office down at Enterprise. District 3 is in Tuscaloosa, by the way, Northport. Fred Hardis. Now it's Fred Hardis' time to come under gun. Clarence retired in 1990, along with Merrill Nail, and he was one of the old timers that went on back there in the early picture I showed you. So Fred became chief. He's got hair. If you don't recognize Fred today, here's what he looks like now. And for you former chiefs, you may recognize that desk. I don't know if you recognize it or not, but you've sat at it, and it was retired. I don't think Stan wanted it. He wanted something better than that. You could actually get the drawers open on it. It was kind of a joke. If the chief was out, nobody could open the drawers but the chief. They're kind of stuck. But the tradition has been carried on. Fred assures me that this desk has a lot of traditions that you guys will be familiar with. And about that time that Fred took over, that started out under Barry, with the continuous minimal flows and the Jordan and the releases below Jordan Dam, we got it. FERC ruled in this divine wisdom that you're going to have continuous minimal flows below Jordan Dam. But it ain't going to be what you asked for. It ain't going to be what the power company asked for. We're going to split the baby right down the middle in this 2,000 CFS. But anything, we'll take anything because we also got recreational flows. But I can say that ordeal between us and the power company paid dividends because we quickly moved to work together with the Fish and Wildlife Service to reach an agreement below Thurlow Dam for both continuous minimal flows in a logical manner. It should have been done in the first place. But so we're better off from having to go through that ordeal. One of the things that Fred created too was an aquatic educational program. It's grown quite a bit. We now have 3 people in it, and Doug Darr, and, which you know, and Maurice Jackson, and Brenda. So they're putting on kid fishing events around the state, and another one of the things that you should be familiar with is the Marion Hatchery expansion that took place under Fred's era. We added a new holding house. The old one was tore down. It's more modernistic now. We're able to move more fish more proficiently. And also, guess what, folks? What started out as a 15-year lease, Sam, and then renewed for a 50-year lease because we're going to build some ponds, they just gave the whole shooting match to us and deeded the Marion Hatchery along with the Southeastern Lab and along with the Carbon Hill Hatchery to the state of Alabama. Got a little reversion clause, but that's good. And now then that we've got all of those hatcheries, we had to turn our attention to the next problem. About in the early 90s, I don't know if you remember it or not, we got descended upon in this state by a bunch of musselers. They want to come down here and harvest all the shell. Man, fish biologists don't even know what mussels are. And so this fellow on the far left, that's Jeff Garner. He's our first malacologist. So as you can see, we're beginning to grow again with the type of people that we're hiring. We still haven't added another biologist in the district. But Jeff came on board, and all this tax money, this 5% per pound, was going to be used to operate the malacology section because we certainly needed somebody that could tell us how to identify these things. In fact, I remember the first annual report he sent me. Fred put me in charge of that, and it came in, and I got to looking at it, and there wasn't a single common name for any mussel in that report, and I certainly don't know Latin. It must have been 30 pages thick, and I remember calling Jeff, and I said, Jeff, you're sending this report down here to fishery biologists. If you don't mind, use a few common names. He said, well, I'm working on writing a book, and we'll get to that later on. Some of the things that went on in the 90s was try to figure out where the striped bass were, and this... 3 more minutes. 4. Jerry Moss. Just as Jerry Moss, and he was undergoing, taking a look at some striped bass in Smith Lake, because Smith Lake became very important to us. It's where the reservoir is, the only reservoir for the Gulf Ray striped bass. And fortunate enough, we have that indeed. All right, you might recognize these guys. There again, we begin to branch out and start looking back in our streams. That's the Alabama sturgeon. It's worth its weight in gold, folks. Little blue sucker. That might be some of the activities that's going on. As we begin to reach out and work with other organizations, we begin to find out there's something more than a hook and a bullet organization out there. In fact, we funded, under Fred, the first Fisheries Alabama, the second Fisheries Alabama book that ever published in the state. And about that time, Fred gets ready to leave office and move on up the hall, that's right, the third Fisheries assistant director, I guess. And we began to think that perhaps we're not just the game and fish division, we're the wildlife and freshwater fisheries, all-inclusive everything, including mussels, snails, and some of those things that I still haven't figured out what they are yet. And we re-subdivided the state into 6 districts again. So that's what our new state district lines look like. And then Stan Cook in 2000 became the chief. And you might recognize Stan. He doesn't get a whole lot of time to get out there and go fishing like some of these other guys, earlier guys, got a chance to do. And that's the organization. Man, have we grown. You wouldn't even recognize us. And as of 2009, from those humble beginnings of about 26 employees total, back whenever Sam became chief, we've grown to 73 employees in the fisheries section, 28 biologists, still only 12 biologists in districts, 3 administrative biologists, 2 assistant chiefs and a chief, 13 biologists are either at hatcheries or the Alabama Aquatic Biodiversity Center or the state or other statewide programs. And what has consumed most of his time are the relicensing of the 18 reservoirs around the state, power company reservoirs. And again, we're reaching out to all the different people that are working on mussels and other things below our dams. This is the Gulf Race striped bass. We're mighty proud to see that booger here. We happen to be the main supplier of Gulf Race striped bass fry for the whole southeast. And also, Sam, we're working on alligator gar. We got to recover that species too, make sure we got some. And this is another little critter that's kind of important. That's the Atlantic sturgeon. So you can see we're not just a hook and billet organization anymore. That's one that I guess caught in the honey hole I told him about. And we're also worried about invasive species. The old apple snail, ironically, is found right there at Spring Hill in that 3 Mile Creek right below Spring Hill. And expos, that's another thing I started during Stan's era. And lo and behold, Jeff Garner came true to his word and published the Freshwater Mussels Book of Alabama. At least it's got common names in it, and I can identify them from looking at the pictures. And this guy here running the AABC Center over in Marion, that's Paul Johnson. I told you these mussel guys were different. Thank goodness for snails, and that we hope we're going to be able to recover that. And some of the fruits of our labors working with other organizations is try to continue to get some of the FERC relicense done, and we're in the process right now of working on Lake Martin. Appreciate your time.